Okay. Andiyan na si Dean. All right. Afternoon, Dean.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're starting to admit participants and we're going to start in a minute or two.
Did you provide a virtual background, Brian? Wala naman, no?
Okay lang po din. Nag-send po ako before pero I'll send you na lang din po ulit.
Can you resend na lang para madali?
Okay po.
Yun. Sa email mo, pinadala or dito sa chat na lang?
Sige po.
The Philippines is one of the most biologically diverse countries in the world. However, from 21 million hectares of forest lands in 1900, the country has significantly lost its tropical forest to around 7 million hectares as of the moment. Deforestation and forest degradation are some of the materialist proof of the new epoch called the Anthropocene, or Age of Man. The Anthropocene as proposed current geologic age characterizes the dominant influence of humans on climate and the environment. This epoch exposes inequalities and environmental injustice that demand an inclusive governance, but it also signifies the need and opportunity to work together for a sustainable future. Through this compendium of case studies from Forest Foundation Philippines and its partners' experience in implementing forest conservation projects, we aim to examine local accounts of humans' dynamics with the forest and the environment. Through an exploration of the past and understanding of the present, we hope to inspire conversations, further research, initiatives, policies, and harmonious human-nature relations towards the conservation, protection, and restoration of Philippine tropical forests.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining the virtual launch of Forest Foundation's book titled Forests in the Anthropocene Perspectives from the Philippines. I am Brian Mariano from Forest Foundation, and I will be your moderator for today's event. First, let me walk you through our program for today. For the first part of our program, we will hear the story behind the idea of the book from the editors. This is going to be followed by 6 short recorded presentations from the contributors and share what their respective chapters are all about. We will also have a 15-minute open forum afterwards to answer some of your questions. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature for this and do not forget to indicate the name of the presenter whom you'd like to address your question. And lastly, we will share information on how you can download the book for free, to be followed by final message from our editors. By the way, as participants to this Zoom webinar, you will have restricted audio and video access. We are also recording this event and later on upload to the Foundation's social media pages. We hope you enjoy this event and stay with us for the next 1.5 hours. For sure, you're all curious about the idea behind the book, including our vision, objectives, and process on developing this. And so I would like to introduce our editors as they discuss more about this edited book. First is Antonio Lavinia. He is currently the director of the Energy Collaboratory of the Manila Observatory and formerly sat as chair of the Board of Trustees of Forest Foundation Philippines. Next is Jose Andres Canivel, or Ongi. the Executive Director of Forest Foundation, and who is also going to lead this conversation. Hello, Dean Tony and Sir Onggi. And
Hello.
lastly, Donna Paz Reyes, a former chair of the Department of Environment of Miriam College, and she's also a former program committee chair at Forest Foundation. Hello, welcome Dean Tony, Sir Onggi, and Ma'am Donna. And we're very excited to hear from you and learn more about the idea behind Forest in the Anthropocene book.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And indeed, for the next few minutes, we'll take you through the thought process and the objectives of the book that we're launching this afternoon, Forests and Anthropocene. Let me start first with the chair of our program committee, then Dr. Donna Paz Reyes, and then maybe she can tell us a little bit about the objective of the publication, the intent in making the book. Ma'am Donna.
Good afternoon, everyone. Forest Foundation Philippines believes in creating knowledge channels by which we share our experiences, not just in terms of evaluation of programs and projects, but also the lessons learned while doing all of this. And so after many years ago, when we created the various case studies, we said that we should come up with another book, this time not on the projects itself, but maybe discussions of the paradigms that were used with the belief that this will eventually lead us to thinking about the ways by which we do things today, our strategies, our paradigms, so that in the future we will be able to improve our systems, the way that we think, and eventually the methodologies that we use in forest conservation. So basically, Forest Foundation Philippines focuses on community-based approaches. So it's do, just doing things on the ground and making things work. But we should spend time to think about what we're doing and how we can improve matters for policymakers, for educators, and for many other stakeholders who are involved in forest conservation. And thus, that is the purpose of this book, to be able to initiate discussions on how we do things, how we think about what we do, and how we will proceed in the future. And this is especially important because in the past, we've thought about Philippine eagle, the birds, the bees, and everything else, but we believe that we focus now on the dominant species on the earth, the one that will probably create solutions to the mess that we have created in the past. So all of these discussions today, we hope we'll be able to initiate discussions because we are in the process always of improving how we manage the earth, if we indeed do manage the earth. So we were able to get some not very good, but excellent writers to do this and to tackle them on the various programs, networking, tree growing, etc., creating corridors in the Philippines, which are the basic approaches of the Forest Foundation Philippines. So with that, we are happy to present our book, a creative effort of everyone. And in a lot of ways, while we helped direct the book, we were basically also observers, onlookers on the process, of the thought process that was involved in creating what we believe is a very good book. Not to say it's an excellent book. Tony, I hope that's the way we discuss it, because we put a lot of effort and thought into this matter in the program committee and in the board of Forest Foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Donna Reyes. I think it's clear, that in terms of the intent, that it was a look at current practices, a look at what's happening at the communities, and that that examination, that thinking would lead the foundation towards doing better. But I'm also interested in and I hope to share, we hope to share with you as well some of the processes that went into the researching, the writing, and the development of the book. And for that, I have to thank then our chair, the Dean Tony Lavinia, who actually took leadership of this project after it was approved at the program committee and it was presented to the board. Dean Tony, I know you had many excellent suggestions, but could you share with us why you wanted to take on the examination of local challenges in an interdisciplinary manner? And where I think many are asking, where we got all of these great researchers who've done excellent writing for us. Dean Tony?
Thank you, Ongi. From my side, I mean, the way I would like to think about this in terms of how we ended up doing this book, the insights come from two starting points. The first, the bottoms-up approach. I saw as former chair of the Forest Foundation, how much good we were doing on the ground, and the innovations that people were doing, the success, the outcomes, the impacts of the work on the ground, and the remaining challenges, to be honest. I mean, it's not like we've fixed everything. On the other hand, as people know, I have extensive experience internationally on processes like the Climate Change Convention and the Biodiversity Convention, where I know there's a lot of need, a very big need for reflection on what's happening on the ground, to be able to, explore strategies that work, like community-based strategies that work. But see, if you want to translate insights from local experience to something that your colleagues and your sister and brother organizations all over the world can also implement in their countries, you have to have good, solid research. It's not just and brilliant, innovative, also people who knows how to frame the issues that they deal with, people with new ideas. I mean, because if you don't do it that way, then it will just come back like any others, like some other books in the past of just case studies. Then that's not so meaningful, like documentation of what we have done, and that's what we were not after. We were not after documenting what we were already doing, because we knew that. We were after projecting what we were doing so that the rest of the world can learn from us, the rest of the Philippines can learn from us, and in the process, we can also learn from ourselves as we look at our experience. I mean, so that's the approach, and for that reason, we had to get the best in the field. I mean, people who actually were working on this at the cutting edge of research, of scientific and policy research. And here I'm kind of proud that because I read a lot, I do read a lot, and I also engage a lot with both international colleagues and Filipino colleagues, especially in the diaspora, that we were able to identify really, for me, the best in the field and giving fresh insights. I mean, you won't get the usual thing from them. They're from all over the world. They're also from all over the Philippines, from Los Baños to Cagayan de Oro, from Germany to Gideon is always somewhere in the world, but also from Diliman. But Gideon is also in Mexico, I think. Right now, we are also from Australia, but they're all Filipinos, because we wanted people to understand the Philippine experience and the local experience. So we have all of these colleagues that we have, and you'll hear from them. I mean, in a few minutes, we have Leanne from the Netherlands and Germany. She's based now in University 20 for her work, but based in physically based in Munster. We have Denise Matias now in Berlin, the Sustainable Development University in Germany. We have Dr. Manny Solis now in Australia, but was actually in the Philippines while doing most of this. Really one of the #1 climate change and energy experts who are able to see this perspective. We have Dr. Gideon Lasco. Of course, we have Dr. Juan Pulin and his team and Dr. Kathy in Cagayan de Oro, and of course Ongi, and we were able to, the editors were able to get this in a second orchestra, and making sure that we would be able to, and also Donna, Ongi, and I were able to get this together. And so I'd like to congratulate all of us, and hope that the audience and the readers of this will profit as we profited and learn from each other. Thank you, Ongi.
Thank you, Dean. Just a couple, just a last question perhaps on the framing of this book. It's titled Forests in the Anthropocene, and maybe I'd like Tony to pick up from that. Why did we frame it as forests in the Anthropocene? And then I'd like towards the end, as an end note, perhaps Ma'am Donna can further explain her point on moving away from the birds and the bees to people, to users, and to resource managers. Dean Tony?
Sure. This comes from the insight that and which is very Philippine, but actually it's a global insight for anyone who have worked on forests globally, and I've done that. That at the center of all the challenges that we face in terms of protection of forests and enhancing forests is our human beings and human societies. And it's not all negative. There's also good things that people are doing, and you will see that in this book. Both governments as well as communities are doing. But it's very important to pay attention to this actor. Now, we're not at all saying by using the word Anthropocene that the forest is now dominated by human beings, and the forest is now doesn't have an existence in itself. I mean, there's just the whole question also of forests having their own rights, and trees having their own rights, and the birds and the bees having their own rights. But we recognize that if we are to fix the forest and the challenges that we are facing in forests, from climate change to conversion to extractive industries, that we need to pay attention to how humans have interacted with forests, and that's really the perspective that we have come up with in doing this book.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean. Well said. Dr. Donna, please.
I think the main idea here too is that it's basically the human beings who are the main actors in conservation, and therefore because of this we have to focus on how human beings not only destroy, that we can look at the problematic, but also more importantly, we look at the ways that work, and especially in the Philippines. In the past, when you say, let's go save the birds, people will say, especially in the Philippines where there's a lot of poverty in the countryside, what will we do with the birds? Can they be eaten? So while we believe, as Tony has said, in the importance of life itself, and for us to be ecocentric in a sense, we believe that the solutions lie in people, in communities that value the forest, because they give us water, they give us food, they give us medicine, they give us the basic things that we need. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why we're focusing on humans today, because in a sense, we believe that we humans are the main providers of solutions that will take care of the earth itself, and that will take care of an earth that takes care of us. So That's the focus of this book. It's Anthropocene, not to say that it's just anthropogenic. It is also ecocentric, but nevertheless focusing communities, on communities and governments, on civil society work that will lead to the conservation of our forests for this generation and for generations to come.
Let me just add, if I may, one more thing, Ongi, which is the importance here of the work that was done on the ground by the communities that we work with. I mean, this book, I'm very proud of this book as an academic exercise, very proud of it as an international policy intervention. I would hope that the foundation would disseminate this book, and there's lots of lessons learned. In Glasgow next week, nature-based solutions and halting deforestation by 2030 will be a big issue, a big part of the decisions to be made, and this book should be able to contribute to that. But I think we owe really our partners, our communities that we work with, and the organizations that work with them on the ground, because we're just harvesting the lessons from, over a decade of work by the foundation. Of course, it goes without saying that our colleagues in the foundation are led by Brian and others that work on this book also deserve a lot of credit for getting this to where it is. I mean, in a pandemic, because we finished all of this in a pandemic, and I think our colleagues in the foundation that work hard to do this, the several of them that we need to acknowledge will make this, they should also be proud of this, and we acknowledge their work as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Tony and Doc Donna. I hope everyone is now keen to learn more about the work of our researchers as they interacted with partner communities, as they looked at approaches that we've tried. And so I will now turn you over to Brian and towards the next point of our launch this afternoon. Brian?
Hi, thank you so much, Sir Ongi, Dean Tony, and Doc Donna. It's a very interesting discussion, and then I'm also really happy to say that our contributors for this book, excellent scholars, are also here to join us, and let us now unpack what we mean by perspectives in this book's title. So the book is composed of 6 chapters, and they aim to provide local accounts of humans and forest dynamics here in the Philippines, and probe into the historical trajectories and conservation experiences, as you've all mentioned, in the context of forest landscapes across in the archipelago. So we will now proceed with recorded presentations from our contributors to know a little bit more about the contents of the book. They're also here on Zoom, and they can answer your questions later during the open forum. All right, so let's start with with our first chapter to provide us an overview of the intricate relationship among people, forests, and policies viewed through different lenses on social, political, economic, and cultural influences in the Anthropocene. We have Dr. Juan M. Pulhin. He is a full professor, UP Scientist 3, and former Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources in the University of the Philippines, Los Baños.
This chapter is titled Forest Conservation in the Philippines, Linking People, Forest, and Policies. My 2 co-authors in writing the chapter are Wela Katucho and Perlin Yoshida. As the first chapter of the book, our chapter provides a national historical overview of the intricate relationship among people, forests, and policies viewed through the lenses of social, political, economic, and cultural influences in the Anthropocene. A retrospection of the country's history of forest destruction and degradation unfolds the three significant periods that accentuate the evolution of human-environment relationship. During antiquity, indigenous peoples lived in harmony with nature, grounded by laws that reflected their deep connection and high regards for nature. However, events such as colonization, industrialization, modernization, and commoditization resulted in the rapid loss of the forest cover and enculturation of the Filipinos. Yet, behind these physical alterations are the enabling policies that legally supported the exploitative and destructive logging practices and economic development that led to the inevitable path towards the Anthropocene. As shown in the slide, the massive forest cover loss from 1900 to 1960 reflects how industrialization and commoditization merged with other socioeconomic factors affected the forestry sector during the colonial periods. Meanwhile, forest cover loss after colonization, that was 1960 to 1999, implies the intensity of these foreign influences and their incorporation to the laws governing the forestry sector. Significantly, a dramatic swivel towards the path of sustainable forest management through the enactment of Community-Based Forest Management or CBFM in 1995 signified a glimmer of hope in their new epoch. This opened up the potential of policy intervention in creating a new era of forest conservation and management. As the national strategy to achieve sustainable forestry and social justice, CBFM signaled the rise of people empowerment, community participation, and sustainable development. Over the years of implementation, the program reaped various successes because of its supporting policies and the synergy among its key actors, the people's organizations, local government units, and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. This graph shows the successful exchange between the destructive and unscrupulous timber license agreement or TLA system and the CBFM program towards the 21st century. Despite positive change, the trend reveals that the program is short-lived. The few increases in the forest cover brought by CBFM and the succeeding programs on reforestation and forest conservation are almost negligible compared to the rapid rate of forest cover decrease in the previous century. Numerous entanglements with issues on weak accountability structure, poor community participation, and transparency in decision-making, bureaucratic apathy, and corruption have thwarted most of the program's intended benefits. In essence, the ideal and envisioned impacts of CBFM did not materialize because the country's main legal, political, and economic orientations are not conducive for the true fulfillment of its principles. Consequently, these proximate causes further intersect with the contemporary environmental, socioeconomic, health, and policy problems way beyond the forestry sector. In light of this, the call for an integrated approach to harmonize all efforts from various sectors at the different levels is imperative. In conclusion, colonization coupled with the global forces of industrialization, globalization, and modernization compel the Philippines towards the inevitable path of the Anthropocene. Enculturation of the Filipinos resulted in the alteration of their human-environment interaction. This reveals the root problem of the Anthropocene, that man's connection with the environment now barely exists. Through responsive policies and programs anchored on good governance principles, it is still possible to generate positive and beneficial changes in the Anthropocene. In terms of future trajectories, the Fourth Industrial Revolution and development, inter- and transdisciplinary research, particularly the coupling of natural and social science, emergence of relevant topics for future research and development, crowdsourcing through citizen science, and integrated policy reforms strengthened by harmonized efforts are few of the steps that the country could take to ensure better future. Regardless of the negative perceptions on the Anthropocene, the domination of people with renewed mindsets that would result in collective actions could still tap the potential of redirecting the path of this age towards sustainable management. With this, we are inviting all of you to read our chapter, including the succeeding chapters of this book, and collectively take these perspectives into reality. Thank you very much. This
Thank you so much, Doc Pulhin, on that presentation. Our next presentation is from Doc Lian Nguyen Long. She is a professor of public administration at the University of Twente in Netherlands. So for their chapter, they probe into the relationship between local and landscape-wide conservation actions and aim to shed light on the social structures that facilitate leadership and collaboration in forest governance.
Forests in the Anthropocene, Perspectives from the Philippines. Chapter 2, A Networked Landscape, Using Relational Structures to Examine the Implementation of Community-Based Forestry Projects in the Calatungan Mountain Range. Hello. On behalf of my colleagues, Catherine Diaz and Mark Kyle Martinez, it is my pleasure to speak about our work with you today. My name is Lian Long. I am Professor of Public Administration at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. Our work is about how the Lumad in the Mount Calatungan mountain range build, nourish, and leverage their social networks in the course of their struggle to protect their ancestral domains. We aim to shine a light on how network analysis can be used to assist project managers design programs and improve cross-cultural collaboration within the context of community-based forestry. The Mount Calatungan mountain range is a landscape where we do our research. This is one of the few remaining landscapes in the Philippines where old growth forests can still be found. The ecosystem services rendered by the landscape are manifold. To begin, it is a key biodiversity area. It also houses and nourishes 4 river basins, the Pulangi, Cagayan, Muleta, and Marudigao rivers, which make it a hub that connects over 35 river systems on the island. The forests in the landscape protect downstream communities from flooding. Moreover, the landscape is an important carbon sink. Guaranteeing that the landscape can continue to provide these crucial ecosystem services are the forest-dwelling Lumad peoples, whose ancestral domains lie within the mountain range. This chapter uses a mixed method research design to illustrate how social network analysis can be used as a useful tool for designing, implementing, and evaluating projects in landscape governance. It is based on a document analysis of 167 documents and 62 interviews, alongside 9 site visits. Using this method, we are able to illustrate how network position can be used to understand actors' influence within the network, as well as crucial intergroup dynamics which can help or hinder project implementation. As a result of our work, we are able to make 3 recommendations to the Forest Foundation of the Philippines and all other relevant stakeholders. Our recommendations are that the activities that strengthen Indigenous knowledge systems and practices should be supported, that Indigenous peoples' organizations' efforts to secure their land rights should be supported, and that Indigenous peoples should have stronger representation at all levels of government, particularly local government. We'd like to invite you to read our chapter to learn more about why we make these recommendations. Thank you for your attention and enjoy reading the book.
Thank you so much, Doc Lian, for that presentation. Despite the existence of forest guards, or as we call it, bantay gubat, as field level implementers of environmental policies, little scholarship has been done to document their motivations, their roles, and their lived experiences. So we'll hear more about this qualitative study on forest guards to be presented by Dr. Gideon Lasco. He teaches anthropology at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and is currently a research fellow at the Ateneo de Manila University Development Studies Program.
Good day, everyone, and thank you to you all, and thank you to Forest Foundation Philippines for this book and for involving me in this important endeavor. My chapter is about forest guards in the Philippines. So I look at forest guards, bantay gubat, some of them are known as bantay gubat, rangers, guardia monte, among other terms. But they're an important part of frontline environmental work. And I believe that for us to move forward to crafting local policies, it's important to explore their roles, motivations, and also understand their lived experiences. So just to give you some samples of what we found out in this research, which involved us going to places like Bukidnon, Misamis Oriental, Sierra Madre, Mount Makiling, we learned, first of all, that many of these forest guards actually profess a deep love for the mountains, for the forests. We also look at roles that forest guards play, including their routine tasks, but also special activities. We also explored their needs and aspirations. So, of course, financial need is one of the most important, but beyond that, they're requesting things like health insurance, things like radio, more equipment that's specific to the needs that they have in their communities. They're aware of what's happening in other parts of the country, including other bantay gubat or forest rangers getting killed, and of course, it also affects the way they think about themselves. It makes them feel afraid and concerned. So some of the themes that emerged in our findings include sense of identity and belonging, so that they really embrace this role. It gives them a sense of belonging because these groups become very important in their everyday lives, this organization of Bantay Gubat, especially the volunteers. And this might explain why they continue, even though they don't really get too much in terms of financial reward. There's social capital gained as being Bantay Gubat. However, I also saw how this can undermine forest governance because their loyalty can be based in these groups of volunteers more than, for example, more than the community or more than the environmental imperative. So it becomes almost like a fraternity in some ways. We also learned from talking to forest guards, talking to the people who work with forest guards, that just as anthropologists have pointed out, indigenous needs and aspirations can clash with imperatives of forest protection. So the Bantay Gubat can find themselves caught between the demands of their communities for more resources from the forest and also the demands of environmental work, which requires them to enforce those rules and stop this kind of activities. However, indigenous knowledge can strengthen forest protection. It can empower forest protection in ways that we haven't fully explored. Now, another key theme, I think one of the major themes in the chapter is sustainability. We saw many of the Bantay Gubat being older than in their 50s or older, so they're concerned about who will take over. Another concern also within the realm of sustainability is the fact that many of their funding comes from NGOs. It's project-based, so they rely on year-to-year support. It's not constant. It's not guaranteed. It might depend also on who is in power in the LGU or in Congress. So the conclusion, therefore, is that we really need to incorporate not just the needs of the forest guard, but also their voices, their perspectives, their insights about conservation. So that's it for my chapter. Again, it's really an honor, and I really thank Forest Foundation Philippines for this opportunity. And I look forward to the feedback to the book and to the chapter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc Gideon. Our next presentation is from Denise Margaret Matias, a professor for ecosystem-based transformation management in UNESCO Biosphere Reserves at the Eberswalde University for Sustainable Development in Germany. So in their chapter, they explore forest livelihood projects that promote multiple forest products and how diversified livelihoods contribute to ethno-competitiveness of indigenous peoples.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and I would like to give you a short introduction about my chapter on indigenous forest livelihoods in the Anthropocene, social ecological assessment of abaca and giant honeybee, indigenous forest enterprises through a transdisciplinary approach, which I co-wrote with Hannah Claudine Gallardo, Sean Alain Betonio, and Marcel Maris Bacas. So first, I would like to introduce you to the giant honeybee and abaca. The giant honeybee is one of 9 honeybee species in the world, and it's occurring also in the Philippines. As you can see, here is a hive, and it's an open nesting species, which is just out there in the wild, in the forest. While abaca is from the family of banana, and you can see here, these are the plants of abaca. And what is a transdisciplinary approach? So in this figure from EZO from 2020, we see that a transdisciplinary approach shows that a common research object comes from the nexus of the societal problem and a scientific problem. And through this, we try to produce new knowledge and have transdisciplinary integration wherein a research such as what I did with Forest Foundation Philippines also results to something that is helpful for societal praxis. In our research, of course, it's not just thinking about the science behind it and the methodology, but we also ensure that we respected the rights of indigenous peoples, and we had free, prior, and informed consent from them. So here you can see some of the photos from our visit to the community. On the left, this is discussing our project, and on the right, as you can see here, there is a pig, and this is one of the offering for the rituals of the community. So we had to do all of this with them. And it's not just that. Of course, our fieldwork was also conducted collaboratively with the community. So on the left, as you can see, a honey hunter lights up leaves for smoking out bees from the namu. And when they go up, of course, they need to have the honeybees out of the beehive so that they also don't sting. And then on the right, we see that an abaca harvester is mapping geographical coordinates of abaca plants. Maybe you don't see it that well, it's a small photo, but his left hand is holding a GPS. And this is one of the methods that we used in our research to actually map out the coordinates of where the abaca plants are in the community, as well as where the giant honey beehives can be found. So an NDVI analysis shows that the forest area of the community is rather quite good, even throughout the years or 15-year analysis. And shout out to our geographer who helped us here, to Sir Bonnie Soriano. Thank you so much. And then apart from our NDVI analysis, we have also looked at the different value chains for honey and abaca. So for honey, we see this only 4 boxes, but if we take a look at the value chain of abaca, there are a lot of number of boxes. You don't have to really read it, but you just have to look that there's more complexity in terms of abaca compared to giant honeybee value chain. So what do these all say in a nutshell? First and foremost, with abaca and the giant honeybee, we see that diversified livelihoods may contribute to the ethno-competitiveness of the indigenous community. So if you read the chapter, you will see that we also look at the gross margins of how much they earn. And we see that, yeah, they earn more from harvesting honey, but doesn't really mean that it has to be either or. It can also be both contributing to the livelihoods of the indigenous community. And we also see that high NDVI of community forests may be an indication of sustainable harvesting of abaca and forest honey. So we say thanks to the Higaonon community and Agbihiku for taking care of their forest community, and as well as thank you to NTFP EP Philippines and Dindongawan for working together with the Higaonon community for taking care of their forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Denise. All right, so if you have questions, kindly send them in using the Q&A feature here on Zoom. We still have 2 presentations from our contributors. In the next presentation, we will hear about the policies, forest conservation, and energy nexus as an area of concern in the Manuel Solis, a senior research fellow at the Manila Observatory.
A pleasant day or evening wherever you are. My name is Manuel Solis, PhD. I'm currently affiliated with the University of Sydney Law School and also the Manila Observatory as a senior research fellow on climate change. Today, I would like to share with you my chapter contribution to the Forest Foundation's research book project. And the title of my presentation is Exploring the Nexus Approach in Forest Conservation and Energy Access. So I've just shortened it, and perhaps I can start with a brief background about this chapter. So briefly, many of the global and development challenges are interconnected, and that is quite prominent, especially when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs. While there might be 17 goals and several hundreds of targets altogether combined, all these goals are actually interlinked. So that is very prominent now when it comes to global concerns and development challenges. However, because of in the past, despite this current global approach, there's a tendency to address many of the concerns singly, resulting in what is called policy and decision-making in silos. What happens there, if you have such an approach, this effectively impedes the creation of an enabling environment for policy integration and coherence. It is not therefore surprising when we look at the forest and energy sectors, specifically when it comes to forest conservation and energy, the nexus between these 2 sectors actually remain unexplored in the context of the Philippine institutional, legal, and policy frameworks. So let me just briefly explain about this nexus approach. It's actually born out of the need to reconcile long-term and global objectives involving climate protection, ecosystem stewardship, and equity goals. So what's happening is that, because of the sectoral and single system approach, there is actually a need to bring this together in terms of achieving global objectives such as the Sustainable Development Goals and global climate change objectives. The Nexus approach is usually employed to provide a more comprehensive information to be able to better understand complex interactions, optimize resource sustainability, and be able to promote or advance policy coherence. It is also an approach that is flexible enough to function not only as an analytical tool, but also as a conceptual framework, and can be a discourse in itself. So what's the current approach so far? So internationally, we do have many global objectives as exemplified by the Sustainable Development Goals and the global climate change regime represented by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. The prominent approach being taken right now internationally is adopting an integrated management approach to land use and land use change to achieve interrelated and complementary objectives on forest conservation, energy access, and climate change mitigation. So any action undertaken will be based on what is described as a holistic and multi-dimensional understanding of forests by placing equal or greater emphasis on social, environmental, and governance aspects. This will again provide ultimately that close link in interdependency between forest conservation and energy access. And this is very evident in the way those SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals and the global climate change objectives will be achieved. So that is very clear at the international broader level. So in this research, we analyzed and tried to uncover the gaps in terms of policy coherence when it comes to forest conservation and energy access. And one of the findings that coming out of this research is the lack of effective legal and policy frameworks in place which actually links or promotes, forest conservation and energy access together. Meaning to say, they are actually delinked. Because of this delinking and approach that is basically separate and considering both forest and energy as separate systems, then it becomes really fragmented. And this is actually has historical roots wherein legislation and policies are developed along sectoral lines and institutional mandates. Failure among various forest and energy actors would also be, the domino effect of such an approach, wherein forests and energy are considered separate systems, which in effect ingrains a business as usual approach. Again, this highlights that the coupling of otherwise interrelated or interlinked sectors such as forests and energy. What is revealing, actually more alarming in effect, is that we do not have actually in the Philippines a national policy that addresses access to clean cooking facilities, because energy access is not just access to, for example, electricity, but also access to clean cooking facilities and technologies. Now, this is a big gap considering current research or figures would show there are about 61 million Filipinos still reliant on traditional cooking, traditional biomass for cooking using, for example, wood. In conclusion, and moving forward, there's evidently a need for policy integration and coherence so that we can fill those gaps and be able to redouble efforts to enhance energy access, particularly in rural areas, while achieving forest conservation at the same time. There's also the need to overcome what we call the legislative inertia and be able to update laws such as the Presidential Code of the Philippines for the sustainable management of the country's forests in line with sustainable development and climate change goals. Again, a review of the Philippine policy and legal framework, which there are actually opportunities that exist wherein we have what we call policy instruments such as nationally determined contribution, the National Conservation Strategy, and the community-based forest management, where there is so much potential to be able to explore, the deeper linkage between forest and energy to deliver a Paris Agreement compliant country instrument and to achieve sustainable development goals. While, as I mentioned earlier, the Nexus approach is a very effective way to uncover those gaps and explore and analyze policy coherence, it is still considered a novelty in terms of establishing that nexus between forest conservation and energy access. And therefore, the research does not purport to hold all the answers using this approach to every question that may arise. And finally, because of this, the research can be further extended, especially in areas where the literature remains lacking. So for example, it's found based on research again globally that the most marginalized when it comes to energy access and forest conservation would be the women who actually collect all those wood fuel for household use. And they are the ones exposed to what we call indoor air pollution, which the World Health Organization describes as contributing to at least more than 4 million mortality globally. And therefore, it's something which must be explored. So hopefully, through this, by sharing this research and through the book, we'll be able to explore further and have an active conversation when it comes to better approaches in terms of policy coherence and integration when it comes to forest conservation and energy access. So thank you very much for listening and hope to be able to answer your questions later on.
Thank you, Doc Manny. Again, if you have questions to our presenters, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, or you may also send your questions via Zoom chat. All right, so we're down to our last presentation, the 6th chapter from the book. So this, for our last presentation, we have Dr. Catherine Rowing Chico Almaden, college president of the Northern Bukidnon State College, as she examined interrelated sustainability issues on water demands in the context of Cagayan de Oro River Basin.
Today, I will be sharing with you the salient features of Chapter 6 titled Examining Sustainability Issues of the Water-Dependent Economy of Downstream Sectors in the Cagayan de Oro River Basin. The main objective of this chapter is to examine the sustainability issues and water pressures from the downstream economic sectors in the Cagayan de Oro River Basin, specifically Cagayan de Oro City. It applies the systematic review of existing studies and the analysis of secondary data for the appraisal of the status of water-dependent economic sectors of Cagayan de Oro City. The chapter starts with some descriptions of the physical attributes of the Cagayan de Oro River Basin and Cagayan de Oro City. As shown, the river has its headwaters in the Kalatungan mountain range of Bukidnon, which joins those that come from the Mount Kitanglad mountain range. It traverses 3 municipalities of Bukidnon and the cities of Iligan in Lanao del Norte and Cagayan de Oro City in Misamis Oriental. The extensive networks of rivers and streams converge into the main channel and finally drains into Macahalar Bay in Cagayan de Oro. The next part of the chapter discusses socioeconomic conditions of Cagayan de Oro City that has direct impact on the demand for water, one of which is population growth. Through the years, the steady population increase consequently made the city denser at 1,493 persons per square kilometer in 2020, which is 4 times higher than the Philippine population density at 365. Owing to this is the doubling of population growth in the last 10 years. Meeting the water demands of the growing Cagayan de Oro City requires not only large quantities of high-quality water for domestic use, but also large volumes of water for industrial production and commercial uses, especially with the sustained growth of new firms. This led to substantial increase in the application for permits for groundwater extraction, causing competing demands which pose enormous challenges to the physical environment. A major section of the chapter discusses sustainability issues in water-dependent sectors in Cagayan de Oro City. Cagayan de Oro City's water-dependent sectors rely on a number of ecosystem services that are critical for sustaining its growth and expansion. Freshwater availability and supply are increasingly unreliable. The absence of a sewerage system in Cagayan de Oro City contributes largely to the pollution and contamination. Further, export of the cost of ecosystem service exploitation from the upstream and downstream areas of the basin have dire consequences not only to Cagayan de Oro City, but for the entire region. The river basin ecosystem services as a whole are under serious threats in the Anthropocene. This is because of the presence of different problems due to climate change. Of important consideration are the issues such as flooding and drought contingencies. Drought have been experienced in the city more frequently in the recent years. In particular, 80% of crops were lost due to the droughts in 2015 to 2016, 2018, and 2019. Groundwater is therefore likely to be overpumped during those periods to compensate for surface water deficiency. The concluding part of the chapter ends with the most pressing concerns and some important considerations. Sustaining the gains of economic progress requires investing in the protection of ecosystems for maintaining the various water-related environmental services that they provide and upon which the downstream economy of Cagayan de Oro City depends. The real challenge is in building awareness of the economic value of healthy ecosystems from the Cagayan de Oro River Basin. That would be all for this chapter. Thank you. Today,
All right, thank you so much to our chapter contributors. And those are just, a sneak peek of what you're going to see and read in the book that we will officially launch in a few minutes. But first, I know you have some questions, so let us now proceed with the open forum. So let me just access the Q&A button. All right, so we have a question from Roy C. For any of the authors or researchers, what is your perspective on the Philippine forest by year 2030? Do you see a greener future? This is the year supposedly we have achieved the SDG goals. So I'd like to open the floor to any of the researchers would like to answer this question.
Do you mind repeating the question, Brian? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. What is your perspective on the Philippine forest by year 2030, Lian? So do you see a greener future? This is the year supposedly we have achieved on the SDG goals.
So I'm not the expert here on that, and I think we have other panelists who are more familiar with what's happening on the ground in the Philippines as far as it is. But I do think that there are. I am really skeptical that we're going to achieve that at this point, just because of developments on the developments on the ground that have been featured in the news. In order to get there, I think that we really need to adopt and implement innovative policies and programs, but also to actually work on improving what is already happening on the ground. And I know that the Forest Foundation is investing also heavily in that and trying to capacitate different partners in different regions to do that. I invite I'll invite anybody with a program that is community-based, especially look at the 4 focal regions of that the Forest Foundation is concentrating on. There's a need to do more work, especially in the middle area of the Philippines, and Forest Foundation is actively trying to advertise for that. So I would say that, yes, I'm skeptical, but hopeful. I do think that there is need to do more work there in order to meet that goal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lian. I guess Denise would also like to respond on that question. Dr. Denise?
Yes, thank you. And I would say it's similar to Lian. I'm also skeptical coming from the stories that I get from the ground. For example, in Palawan, I've been discussing with some of the indigenous representatives there, and they told me that actually illegal logging increased during the pandemic. And it's partly driven, of course, by them unable to sell their products in the market because of the lockdowns, etc. And then, so those who are like middlemen asking for timber, they would go to the indigenous communities and then ask them to cut timber for selling. So I would say like this pandemic probably also contributed a lot to deforestation during this time, and because of the lockdowns, etc., we weren't able to just see it, what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Denise. I think Doc Juan Pulhin would also like to respond to this question.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm probably the only forester here, so I think it's a challenge. If you look at the trend, there is some glimmer of hope. If you look at the current statistics, of course, it's not that significant. Much still needs to be desired. So I agree with my two colleagues that it will certainly be a very uphill battle, especially show that our current resources has been depleted with the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, one of the good things actually that had happened, although we're not celebrating all the impacts of National Greening Program, but if there is something probably that we should be happy about is for the first time that the Philippine government has really committed billions of money for national greening. Of course, much has to be learned in the process, and we are documenting that. FFP is documenting that. We have also recently concluded assessment of community-based forest management. So if only for this, probably there are some glimmer of hope. However, it all depends now on what transformative policies we will be introducing, because currently, if you look at the trend now, and in terms of wood demand, our national demand per year is about, if I remember my figure right, 4 million cubic meters. And we are only able to support 1 million of that. So meaning to say, we have on the negative 3 million, no? Which, and only 1/3 is for export, we are able to import only 1/3 of that. So we are missing the 2/3, and the question now is, how do we provide for the 2/3? So certainly there are poaching here and there and so on. But at the same time, if you look at the statistics as well, most of the efforts right now is from the government sector alone. And the support in terms of financing, as I've said, because of the COVID pandemic, we are really, we have very scarce resources to devote to that. So the only hope that we have is to really working with the private sector. No, we need to incentivize and the involvement of the private sector in terms of not only protection, but also in terms of production, because we are not meeting, as I've mentioned, the demand, a huge demand, 50% or even more of the demand. We are not able to meet it. So certainly, our wood industry was a sunset industry, mainly because we have a very unstable policy in the forestry sector, and that's the problem. No, no one would want to invest now because after planting, even local communities are not able to harvest the very trees that they have planted. So this is a problem. So not unless really we change our policy, and this is what our effort that we are doing right now. We are trying to meet the different forestry agencies to stabilize the policy and hopefully incentivize the production and protection with more involvement, both from the local community sector, but also from the private sector. So we think that this is really the only way to go because, again, the government's coffer has been depleted already. And so if we are looking at 2030, which is not very far from now, then really, despite the glimmer of hope that I was mentioning, in reality, it's really a very uphill battle. But I still hope that if we really create an enabling environment for participation of the private sector, both in terms of meeting demand, but at the same time, mobilizing the rest of the society, like local communities, then we may still hope, I believe.
Thank you so much, Doc Pulhin, for expounding further on the realities of the sector and also still being hopeful on the road ahead. Doc, Manny Solis also mentioned something about sustainable development goals on his chapter. Doc Manny, would you like to also say something about this question? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Brian. It's just a brief comment because when it comes to the SDGs, because it's basically a declaration and a general target. So the best way to really look in terms of are we really contributing or moving towards the target is what we are putting out there. So a classic example would be our nationally determined contribution, which we submitted actually as an update to in compliance with the Paris Agreement. So if you're thinking about the forest, you will be perhaps alarmed when you look at the NDC. There are several sectors that must be targeted for mitigation and adaptation commitments, and forestry is not cannot be seen now in the NDC, unlike in the first submitted intended nationally determined contribution. So that's actually a critique that we actually I co-wrote with Dean Tony Lavinia, and it's alarming, and therefore that puts into context that question whether we're going to achieve our SDG commitment when it comes to the forest. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Manny. As we run up to COP26, Dean Tony, would you also like to say something about the forestry sector contribution of the country to international commitments?
Yeah, I actually am a bit more optimistic or hopeful than our other colleagues for the simple reason that there's a lot more pressure for us to do what is right by forest with our forest in the next few years. I mean, there's momentum for, in fact, the SDG, the very important, also the what's now being discussed in the biodiversity convention, the 30 by 30, 30% protected areas by 2030, which I've also been working and advocating. without being partisan, obviously the election in 2022 matters on how we will be approaching this challenge. And so I would also actually, in fact, ask candidates of what they plan to do in terms of our forests and biodiversity and climate, because they're all interlinked with each other.
Thank you, Dean Tony. I like how our narrative is focused on the current realities, but as well as how do we see the future of forest conservation as well in the Philippines. One of the key themes as well of this book is the interdisciplinarity of perspectives. And I'd like to ask Denise, Doc Denise, you particularly employed a transdisciplinary approach on your chapter, and how or what do you think is the importance of this kind of approach in terms of researching forest conservation issues or topics?
Yes, thank you, Brian. So for those who are not familiar, or maybe you've been hearing about interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and I would say it's been rather loosely used already nowadays. And the idea, however, with transdisciplinary is that it's not just so-called bottom-up approach, but it's actually really looking at a research question based on societal needs. And this means that we draw from the communities or the grassroots what they really see as a research need, and not just something that us, for example, researchers say like, oh, I'm interested in this topic, maybe I can work with a community. And so the importance of such an approach for forest conservation, especially for the question of Roy C. earlier, we see that for a greener future in 2030, we need the communities themselves to tell us, hey, we need work on this. We don't have the research capacity, but we can work with you together. And so I think for us, we need to go out there and really ask and engage them as partners and not just participants for research. And definitely, I would invite those of you watching us today, if you could read our chapter. We give some information about how to do this approach, but other than that, you can also contact me and we can also discuss how to do such an approach. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Denise. One of the interesting approaches as well employed in one of the chapters of the book is social network analysis, as mentioned or as employed by Dr. Lian. Dr. Lian, can you tell us more about why such methodology or research design is important to tackle or to unravel issues in forest governance?
Thank you, Brian. Yes, so social network analysis has long been used in social sciences to understand how outcomes are also determined by our interactions with one another, and increasingly with non-human, with human and non-human interactions. So our interactions with nature or our interactions with technology. And usually it's used after an intervention happens to understand how different interventions impact social outcomes, or ecological outcomes. I would recommend us to think about social network analysis as a tool for understanding what we can do before we design an intervention, for understanding the realities on the ground. I think it's a very flexible method for understanding people's different influences on interventions, and for understanding if there are ideal injection points and partners for collaboration during the design of a program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lian. One of the unique perspectives as well in this book is through the anthropological lens employed by Doc Gideon. Hello, Doc Gideon. Doc Gideon, you mentioned several sustainability mechanisms for the forest guards. Do you have can you further expound on the incentive mechanisms that could be explored as well, or policy level incentives that can be applied for the benefit of the forest guards?
Thank you, Brian, and greetings, everyone. I'm so happy to be really here to join you in this discussion. And this question about the future is, of course, has to be greeted with some dose of, for those of us who have done work in this area, it's inevitable to feel some feeling of at the best cautious optimism, if at all we can have that kind of feeling. But what I saw from the forest guards is that there is a spirit of volunteerism in the community that can be tapped and further incentivized. What I've learned is that even though financial need is of course very important, there are non-monetary ways to incentivize people, including giving them social protection, giving them recognition. One of the forest guards told me that this most memorable was when the governor thanked them personally. And for them, that meant a lot already. So without overstating the importance of the symbolic, I believe that if we can recognize forest guards, because they don't even exist in people's imagination about the forest or about bureaucracy. They're almost invisible in the same way that barangay health workers are invisible in the way people imagine the healthcare system. So bringing them out there, and of course generating popular demand for forest protection through leadership by example as well. So also to segue and to answer one question about what our new leaders, our president should do. I think leadership by example is very important in showing a commitment to the forests and even showing that they enjoy the forests. So that's just one of the things that I'm thinking of drawing from this research on forest guards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. John, and thanks for joining us. I know it's around 1 a.m. now there. So we're very glad that you were able to join us today. We have a question here from Eleric Nalam. What can you say about the land use plan created by LGUs? And do you think it is effective based on the current status of our forest? What can you recommend then? I think Doc Catherine Almaden could answer this because this is very much linked on her study on watersheds.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, much of my work covers about governance of forests and water bodies, especially in the context of transboundary water bodies. What I noticed from my work, for several years now with different LGUs, one of the things that is wanting when it comes to land use plan is really the mechanism that looks into the transboundary nature of the jurisdiction of the forest and the water bodies. So for example, many land use plans remain to be very much concentrated on the political jurisdiction and the political boundaries to which these are managed and governed. And the idea would have been to look into the ridge, for example, in the context of the Cagayan de Oro River Basin, the most ideal would be looking into the transboundary issues from the ridge to the river and to the reef approach. But sadly, in many land use plans, you don't really see that particular issue being addressed. Another one is the demand management. So for Cagayan de Oro City, for instance, a second-tier city, much of the problem is really in the densification of economic activities. So that alone poses a lot of problems when it comes to the dependence of the different sectors, especially the water-dependent sectors, into the services, ecosystem services from the forest. And so that should be addressed, the densification of these different economic activities that lead to competing water demands. Though there are, land zones being implemented, there are very good zoning plans being integrated in the land use plans. Sadly, these are not implemented in the real, in the real world or in the real situations. So that's another issue. And then the third, as an economist, I really advocate the effective and the efficient water pricing mechanism that will incentivize all users. In Cagayan de Oro City and in the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management Council, there had been several movements being introduced, like the payment for ecosystem services. But many of these initiatives remain to be voluntary. And when it comes to ecosystem services, it's really prone to free riders. And free ridership will not work when it comes to the protection of these different ecosystem services. It's the responsibility of all users, domestic and industrial users, to really pay for the benefits that they pay. But sadly, these are not being realized. And I would like to see more land use plans addressing these three major concerns. So thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, Doc Cathy, and thank you very much for participating in our open forum. Perhaps I'd like to ask our chapter contributors if they'd like to say something before we officially launch the book and the book website. So maybe a quick message from each one of the contributors. Maybe we can start off with Lian. Hello, Doc Lian.
Sorry, mic was off. Hi, Brian. Thank you so much. Yeah, I would like to say one thing. First of all, I'd like to thank the Forest Foundation for making this investment. I think that it is an important piece of work. One of the things that I have discovered when I was working here, so unlike many of our colleagues, I'm not as familiar with what is happening on the ground, is that there's a groundswell of innovation and important work that is happening in the Philippines that we are not learning from because it's not reaching the research community. And so I think that this book is an important first step in bringing to light all of the innovative and interesting work that is happening in the communities that are going around. And I hope that this incentivizes other researchers to come into the field in the Philippines to learn from Filipino communities about how they're dealing with navigating issues like climate change and economic pressures in order to protect their forest resources. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Lian. Maybe Dr. Denise?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Forest Foundation and the co-chapter authors for being together in this book. And from my side, I would say, let's please support forest communities because they are the frontliners in taking care of the forests. And so also with the work, thinking of the work of Dean Tony with indigenous communities who are being red tagged, etc. I hope we find it in ourselves that these communities, especially indigenous communities in the Philippines, are actually helping conserve forests, not just for themselves, but for the whole country as well. So as following on what Leon said, yes, let's also find ways to connect to the people on the ground and actually learn more from them. Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Denise. How about Dr. Gideon?
Well, there's really more work that needs to be done in terms of linking the forests to the people. And I think that this is where the different disciplines can come in terms of bridging this. Because if we go back to I think Dr. Paulhin spoke to this earlier by having this historical perspective of colonialism, etc. If we look back at our pre-colonial past and even among our indigenous peoples, there's a sense of being part of nature. There's a sense of belonging to the environment. So this is nothing new. This is nothing new in terms of the way how our people have always conceptualized the forests. And if we are able to use our disciplines together in helping bring this out, but also looking at opportunities that exist now with the pandemic. Of course, it's been horrible, but at the same time, people are looking at plants for joy. People are seeking outdoor spaces, even settling for dolomite. So there's demand for nature. And if we can tap this and learn more how we can mobilize popular support for the forests, then I do believe that there's hope. And I'm committed to be part of this. So really thankful for Forest Foundation Philippines for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Doc Gideon. How about Doc Pulhin? Hello, Doc John.
Yes, Brian. Thank you so much also for the opportunity of being part of this, I would say, very promising and hopefully transforming book of forests in the Anthropocene as far as the Philippines is concerned. It was an opportunity to really synthesize my earlier work, and I thank the Forest Foundation Philippines for that. It was also an opportunity to work with two young researchers who, in a way, co-developed not only the outline, but work with me. I believe that forest is both for the present, but also the future generation. So from the start, I deliberately involved them so that it's not only my perspective, but the perspective of the new generation, the young generation, will be incorporated into the analysis. So it's a combination of a newly senior citizen, but also a young generation. So we're very proud, to be honest, with how the confluence of ideas really came at the end, the chapter. And of course, we also thank very much the reviewers who are also have played a significant role in making our key arguments very clear. But lastly, let me respond in closing to the question, what will I advise as far as the new president is concerned? What should we do in forestry? Well, I have always believed, despite some limitations, that community-based forest management is the way to go. Because they have close association with the forest. They are very dependent on the forest, but they are also at the front line, as earlier mentioned. And so if given a chance to advise the new president, I would say they should revitalize community-based forest management program to really come up with very strong strategic plan that will be pursued. And I think this is really the way forward as far as Philippine forest is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doc John. And next would be Doc Cathy, and lastly, Doc Manny.
Thank you, Brian. I'm very fortunate to be part of this opportunity to work with the Forest Foundation, and for that I am very grateful. I'm also very happy because with this book, I was able to consolidate a lot of my research projects done in the past, as well as assemble all the different research projects and the results and findings of the works of my colleagues in the academe and in the region, especially coming from Region 10, Northern Mindanao. So I'm very hopeful that this book will spur a movement for forest in the Anthropocene. And I am very happy that there are so many innovations presented by my co-authors. And my hope is that this movement will be sustained, and this will be the last, but the first among the many. So once again, thank you very much, Forest Foundation.
Thank you, Doc Cathy. And finally, Doc Manny.
Uh, Again, just like my colleagues, I'm very thankful and grateful to Forest Foundation Philippines for the opportunity to contribute to such a wonderful and very helpful work as we strive for a sustainable forest management. Just a brief statement that, while we are starting a conversation, I'm also hopeful and optimistic that from conversation we'll be able to move to real actions, and this book would be a good starting point and a pathway towards that action. So again, thank you to my colleagues and to those who participated in this webinar.
All right, thanks, Doc Manny, and thanks again, everyone. Could you please open your camera so we can take a screenshot of our panel here? Everyone. All right, just a quick screenshot. So in 3, 2, 1. All right. Okay. So, okay, this is the moment where we'll share how you can download the book. All right, so to officially launch the book, we have developed a book website where you can download individual chapters and access the entire book for free. We also feature a 4-page summary for decision makers outlining the overall recommendations based on the results of the research projects. So you can now access the book website on your desktop, on your desktop and mobile browsers by going to anthropocene.forestfoundation.ph, or you can scan the QR code being shown on the screen. Again, that's anthropocene.forestfoundation.ph. I'm also going to share the link here on chat. All right, so feel free to share as well, to share this as well to your or with your colleagues and on your social media accounts. All right, so as we close this book launch, I would like to call on again our editors for their final message. May I call on again Attorney Ongi, Dean Tony, and Doc Donna Reyes.
Well, first, I'd like to, from on behalf of the foundation, thank the researchers, the writers, and the editors for all of their hard work. We conscripted Ma'am Donna and Dean Tony to work on the book on top of their duties as our trustees. We relied on the network of Dean Tony and Ma'am Donna to be able to work with such excellent researchers and writers. So thank you, everyone. I think we owe a lot of thanks as well, as was mentioned earlier, to the participation and the interest of our partner communities, where we conducted many of the site researches. So I'd like to call now Ma'am Donna for her, for her final for messages as we close this book launch, and then we'll proceed with Dean Tony's. Ma'am Donna.
Yes, may I include my thanks to the members of the Board of Trustees and the members of the Program Committee of the past board, including the U.S. government, of course, represented by the U.S. Embassy, USAID, and the Philippine government, represented by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Finance, Department of Foreign Affairs, and as well the members of civil society and the business sector, who have not only supported the publication of this book, but also likewise gave their inputs during our meetings and our communication. And may I challenge our other stakeholders who are lovers of the forest for us to be contributors to new knowledge in the future by doing your own research, by publishing your own books and articles, whatever it is, whether it be academic or popular. And may I also invite my students who are listening right now to do the same, and as all the other graduate students in many universities in the Philippines, but most of all for us to be able to act, whether as mini funders, whether as big funders, whether as a tree planter because you're getting married or you have a young child who will benefit from these trees. There's no way that we can look at 2030 with hopeful hearts, but it's only by contributing our part in conserving our forests. So maraming salamat sa Forest Foundation. Thank you for involving me in this project. Thank you, Dean Tony. Thank you, Ongi, for I don't know. I think it's because I was an academician that I was put in there as an editor, but it was my pleasure and maraming salamat.
Thank you. I also echo my thanks to everyone, including to the current board of trustees of the foundation that have supported the final stages of this project, and as I said, during a pandemic at that. So maraming salamat sa lahat ng collaborators, maraming salamat sa grupo nila Brian, and of course Ongi that made sure that this gets done. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much to our community partners and organizations. You know, when you write a book or when you work on a book, it's always there's always a sense. At least in my case, I've written quite a lot of books in my lifetime as an academic and as an advocate. But it's always the same kind of nervousness. Kung kaya ba natin, can we actually get to where we want this to be? And it's always a relief when, wow, physically it comes out. In this case, we also have, of course, the electronic versions. We even have the policymaker sums, exactly as I had actually envisioned and thought about when discussing this first with Ongi. So I'm very glad about that. But you know, this was not written for the sake of having a book. This is written to make a difference. I mean, and not just for the Philippines and not just for us, but also for people all over the world that are struggling with, you know, what forests mean in the Anthropocene. I mean, Anthropocene is the world that we live in now, where you know, one way of measuring it is that the human weight, right? The weight of human creation, good and bad, is more than natural creation, right? You know, and then that includes the forest. And so this was not written just to reflect what was happening, just to mirror what was happening. This was written to change what was happening so that we have a better balance in the Anthropocene, and the forest find its role, and we help it find its role through our own actions in the Anthropocene as, you know, as a better role. This morning, actually, I noticed that Catherine, I didn't know that she had moved to Northern Bukidnon, but I was actually with the Bukidnon State University radio station because of the project on COVID-19 of Bukidnon State University, and I had to talk about COVID. But I link it to COVID and forest COVID and environment COVID and biodiversity COVID and open spaces, right? I mean, the public health, we require and pointing out that there's gonna be this pandemic might, and I say might because we don't know if there are gonna be variants, right? More variants, but might be slowing down, might, you know, we might moving to the final stages of this pandemic. I'm not sure, but there'll be other pandemics, and we know that. And if we don't fix our forests, and we also don't make sure that our forests are there in the next pandemic, so we can actually have options on how to live better, at that point, more open spaces, more trees, more forest, urban and rural, then we only have ourselves to blame for the kind of Anthropocene that we have. So I've never seen the Anthropocene as an enemy. I've never seen it something that's necessarily negative. I mean, human beings were given creativity, were given the ability to innovate, the ability to change, to do good things. But we've also done bad things. I mean, as a philosopher, I see that also very clearly. And the choices are before us. So this book was written to give us a chance to make the Anthropocene better for the human being, better for the forest, but better for all beasts and all living things, big and small. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Tony and Ma'am Donna. Great messages. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Attorney Onggi, Dean Tony, and Dr. Donna. Again, thanks everyone for joining. We would also like to thank the editorial team and reviewers, Ana Cristina Bibal, Jamila Joy Reyes, Joan Laura Aves, Diana Stephanie Bagui, Dennis Rosales, Eric Buduan, Ana Veronica Gabriel, Crisel Samantha C, and Shelly Ann Belmonte. And also, we would like to thank Works of Heart as our creative partner for this stunning publication. If you have any feedback, please reach out to us by sending an email to info@forestfoundation.ph. Thanks again, and we hope that you find the book useful, relevant, stimulating, transformative. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Brian.
Bye-bye.